morning to everyone in the room, and good morning to our virtual audience. My name is Carol Booth Olson. I'm a professor in the School of Education. I'm the director of the UCI Writing Project and the director of the Wright Center, a new research and development center focused on the study of secondary writing, which is funded by the Institute of Education Sciences. Today is the first in 3 live stream events that are sponsored by the Wright Center in cooperation with the National Writing Project. And to start us off, we wanted to celebrate 3 of our great friends, Jim Burke, Kelly Gallagher, and Carol Jago, all acclaimed teacher scholars who have wonderful books on the teaching of writing, reading, and literacy writ large that have made a profound effect on all of us in the profession. This is the completion of Jim's 28th year of teaching at Burlingame High School in Northern California. And next fall, he is starting a new gig. So he's taking a new chapter in his educational career. He is moving to Middle College High School in the College of San Mateo in Northern California, where he's going to help secondary kids at the high school level transition to post-secondary education. So we're excited for him and his new activity. Those of you who are listening virtually and those in the room are all well familiar with all of Jim's wonderful books. His best-selling English Teacher's Companion, which I think is now in its 4th edition, What's the Big Idea? The high school edition of They Say, I Say with Gerald Graff and Kathy Birkenstock, Academic Moves with Barry Gilmore, just so many other books. The Norton Anthology, Uncharted Territory. He's been the recipient of so many awards, especially from NCTE, like the Exemplary Leadership Award. And today he's going to talk about this book, the 6 academic writing assignments designing the user's journey. It is a very thoughtful and thought-provoking book that really teaches us to be mindful of why we are doing what we are doing in the classroom and how we could do it better. If you're listening virtually, if you click on Jim's book on the Wright Center website, you will be taken to Heinemann, where you can read more about the book. Under that, you will see Jim's PowerPoint, which you can access. You can also access his handouts. If you scroll down to the bottom of the home page, there's a place where you can click if you would like to be informed of future events. We have a big launch event in the fall with Steve Graham about writing research with about 10 respondents, including David Pearson, Judith Langer, Mary Schleppegrell, Jennifer Fletcher, so it should be a great event. And if you're a tweeter and you would like to tweet, the hashtag is Wright Center Live. So please join me in welcoming our very, very good friend, Jim Burke.
So I think we should take a moment to, hello to all you out there in virtual land, to recognize what a special moment that we're actually here for this morning, right? I mean, Carol does so many things and she's just so humble about it. But this is really, this is like sitting in on the beginning of like something like the National Writing Project, of the founding of the Wright Center, right? Carol's worked so hard to make this come into existence, and the idea of creating a center for the study of secondary writing, I think, is just so profoundly important. And so for all of us, myself certainly included, I feel no pressure at all to be one of the first persons speaking. We were at dinner last night, and I was like more and more like, oh my God, what if this doesn't go well? The whole thing could collapse under my weight. But then the souffle came, and everything was better, and I was fine. But I just wanted to take a minute to recognize Carol. I think we should all just really, really show our appreciation. And there's another side to that, which is that sooner than later, like this is part of the conversation for the day, that Carol and Catherine are moving towards the next stage of their professional careers. And so part of the conversation that we're having today, directly or indirectly, when we talk about the teaching of writing, the design of writing assignments, how to work with students and teachers about writing, is the continuation of the great work that Carol and Catherine have done at the UC National Writing Project Center, right? And so that leadership, whether that's in your small little PLC, whether that's in your department, whether it's going to be in your larger school, including other subject matter conversations that you might be in charge of, or whether you're a TOSA and you're working with teachers to try to get them to work more, bring more writing in. This is all part of what the leadership of writing instruction looks like. My own transition up to the middle college, without going into that too much, what interests me about it is one of the first things that I want you to think about, which is just the origins of your core beliefs about writing. So I think what's so meaningful to me going up to the middle college program is, so this is like juniors and seniors, high school students on a two-year college campus who are still going to be taking a couple high school classes, but then the rest of their day is taking college classes. My life changed at that moment, right? I graduated at the bottom of my class in high school, like way down there, and I was put in a remedial writing program at American River College in Sacramento, and so my core belief, I just want to model this a little bit for you, my core belief is that writing is fundamentally transformational, that it's fundamentally learnable and teachable, and that few things can make a greater difference in both your personal and your professional life. I bring in stuff all the time into class to show kids, like, look, I wrote this letter to the nursing home for my mother-in-law, and this letter making an argument that they'd not done a good job was worth $17,000 because it got the deposit back. And so writing pays. And I have because I come maybe from a working class background, I have a little bit of a bias towards, like, I want you to see how you can use writing in the real world, not just writing, essays about a Robert Frost poem or things like that. And not that there's anything wrong with a Robert Frost poem. So we talk about mindset a lot, and I want to just kind of give you a minute to, whether you want to write about it, if you'd rather turn and talk to somebody, introduce yourselves. We'll be very interactive throughout the time. Just what it's not a long conversation, but what do you believe about writing in terms of what's its importance, its meaning, your attitude towards the teaching of it, your relationship to it. For me, it's changed my life immeasurably. If you'd come up to me when I was in a remedial writing class at American River College and said, someday you'll grow up and you'll be an English teacher and you'll write 30 books, that would have been like the stupidest thing you could have ever possibly said. And so there's this, this experience-based belief that it is something that we can help people learn to be able to do and do well in ways that can really make a difference in their lives. So that's where I'm coming from. So take a minute if you want to write a little bit, if you want to turn and talk with somebody, do a little bit of each, that's fine, but just get your own thoughts down for a minute about writing. I guess we're kind of sort of talking a little more specifically, academic in that direction, but whatever works. There's an interesting study. There's an interesting book out of Harvard, where, I guess if you go to Harvard, you are given kind of a mentor to kind of go through the 4 years with you, and when they get to the end, this guy asks people, what did you do in the time that you were here that helped you get the most out of your education? And the number one thing across every graduate is that I established a strong connection with an adult mentor. But the second thing that's almost as equally strong is writing, and what they mean is not so much I learned how to write well, it's that I developed a voice, and that voice gave me a sense that I have the confidence that I have something to say, and a sense of ownership of their own learning, right? It was really interesting when you look at kind of how much is folded into that, which, to go back to some of the stuff about the soul, begins to be the development of an identity of yourself, and so it really becomes transformative in that way. Yeah, it's great. So I'm going to move us along. I'm not always very good about being mindful of the time, but the recording stuff is gonna make me be more attentive to that. I don't want the camera just suddenly shut off in the middle of a thought at 10:15 or something. So I'd love to hear people's thoughts, but maybe the one that I'll just pick out that I heard from this table that really resonates with me is just the idea of developing a voice, and through that voice developing a sense of ownership of your own learning, of your own thinking, and kind of the confidence that comes with that. I think maybe that resonates with me because I think that's when things begin to change for me, right? And that development of the fact that I have things to say and the ability to say them in a way that will make people want to listen to them. So Anyway, all the pictures we have in here are my students, so I like that. So this might seem like a strange way to begin, but it's very useful for us to think about, designing writing assignments, and that's kind of what we'll talk about this morning. So we started getting Blue Barn a little bit this year, and with each recipe, with each thing that shows up, you get these cards, and so this is the front and the back. And then, of course, they come with the nutritional ingredients. And I want you to think about your writing. I want you to think about a writing assignment, whether it makes sense for you to think about it like for a day or for a unit or whatever. But I want you to, at the table, maybe just talk at the whole table. In what way could we compare a Blue Apron recipe specifically with an academic writing assignment? So just so you know what you're looking at. Is this a laser thing? So you have kind of the picture of what it is. You've got kind of the framing of it's the Portland-inspired chicken lettuce cups. I don't remember eating it. It must not have been that delicious. And it's what was on the counter the other day. You've got some little things to kind of make a connection with it. You've got the ingredients. And then over here you have the directions with these check boxes. And pretty much each thing begins kind of in the imperative. There's like the verbs that begin there. And then here, of course, we have the, they give you pictures, and then we find out the nutritional content. So at your table, take a second and talk about just academic writing assignments in general. It doesn't have to be one in particular, but if it helps to illustrate one of your points to talk about, well, I do this one assignment, just like this, then talk about that. So in what way is this Blue Apron recipe similar to an academic writing assignment? Talk. If you're at home, just think about it. I was going to say, like with friction points, if you think about, I don't know if this is going too far with the friction point stuff, but if you are a good cook, is it a friction point like, that's not the way I would do it, right? I would saute it first or whatever, and well, then there's more of a sense of ownership, right? But and that has, to me, that's the equivalent, I guess, of the kid that basically says, do I have to do this assignment exactly as you're laying it out, or can I do it as this? And those are interesting moments, right? Like when you kind of go okay, I don't have a reason why I can tell you not to write about that character or write about it in that way. So we've probably talked about it enough. Blue Apron is not a sponsor, by the way. It's not product placement. But Blue Apron has been a wonderful addition to our house because my wife takes care of her 92-year-old mother-in-law who's lived with us for a long time. And so it's just really eased that strain for a couple of days. Day before yesterday, the Blue Apron box hadn't come yet. And it was like 4:30, and my wife was like, oh. But then it came. So just there's a lot of interesting stuff that comes up, and I'm really just using it as a tool, to facilitate our discussion. But what are some of the things that come up when you think about this? Really the whole everything you see here, right? The images, the design, because we're talking about design today, right? So everything about that. What are some comparisons? Yes.
The picture is beautiful and perfect, but until you analyze the picture, just like a piece of writing, you don't really know what created that particular piece. Plus, if you leave something out or you change the recipe, it could either be positive but could also create problems.
Kind of depends on whether you do it intentionally, like Catherine was talking about. If you are a good cook and you want to throw in a couple of other spices, then that makes it more of your own, right? But if you're, like me, I don't know, let's see what happens if you put that in there. You're like, oh, I ruined it, and I still have to eat it. But the pictures are interesting, right? The pictures, you have the pictures showing the stages, but then you also have, something we'll talk about a lot today in terms of the design process, like the kids knowing what it should look like, right? I'll probably come back to this again. I think one of the biggest issues around writing in particular is kids can't do what they don't know what that thing looks like. And I think a lot of times we just we'll go home and write a such and such about this, and we don't really ask ourselves whether or not that such and such is something that they actually know what that looks like, or what that looks like at the higher level, right? If we're teaching higher classes or things like that. So yeah, you had a comment.
So the
Annabelle,
image, yes, seems seems to me a visual metaphor for the writing process itself. So the first image there is, look at us, I have a model essay for you to do. Voila, here it is. And then those individual ingredients are the things that you need, the components you need in an essay. And then over here, the second piece, the long one, are all of the things that go into it, the process in which you take, the steps you take to create the essay, and then the nutrition facts, or the rubric. This is what you get. That's kind of the...
Yeah, how do we think about the nutrition stuff? I wasn't going to put that in at first, but I thought, like, oh, I see some interesting connections. So what does somebody think about the nutrition elements as it applies to a writing assignment?
Does it matter? Why it's good for you?
Why?
Is it good for you? Why? How?
But what does that mean? We we've all seen those assignments like, oh, the kids love doing it, right?
You have to know what it means first. It's like if you gave them a rubric or whatever, they would have to actually know what that means for it to actually be significant to them, right? Just like
What the ingredients mean?
Yeah.
Okay.
Even how to read it. I mean, if you look at a nutritional label, so what if you look at the percentage? What is that percentage based on? What does the calorie even mean?
It's really, so it's raising something for me that's been on my mind a lot in the last week. So I was talking to Carol last night about this at dinner, that I went to the ERWC training for the new 3.0 launch, and one of the big emphases in the new iteration is the whole idea of transfer of learning. And one of the things that it really, really brought home to me in a way that I hadn't thought about as much, I guess, is, and I think this is part of what you're talking about, is for me to be much more intentional upfront of what is this stuff that I want them to learn to do, or that they already have learned to do, that I need to bring forward intentionally and call it out and make them, and there, one of the articles I was reading last night was talking about how to emphasize that for kids so they're aware that this is what we were talking about last week. It's not all this discrete stuff. And so keeping that idea in play, across assignments, and so us paying attention to our own ingredients, like, oh, I should drill down on that and make it really clear, like that's the thing we were talking about last week. It might seem different, but it's not. So the whole transfer of learning to me is becoming more and more interesting and important to think about. A couple other thoughts about the, we don't need to, we'll get hungry and have to go out for breakfast if we talk about this too much, but yeah, Carol.
Can you hand Carol the microphone, please? Because the live audience can't hear.
Oh.
Oh, that's going to be hard.
Yeah, where's the microphone? Sorry. Oh, here we go. I have to run around and do Oprah.
Sorry.
Phil Donahue. Okay, yeah.
Just the idea of begin with the end in mind, which I believe you had in one of your books, but that you need to be mindful about if you're sending kids on a journey where you're hoping they arrive, even if they end up arriving at a slightly different place, you have to have in mind where you thought you were sending them.
Right. I think one of the interesting ideas about that I think Catherine or somebody back there brought up is, yes, but do we want to kind of close it off too much? Like are there where the choices, that would allow people to kind of take that in different directions as cooks and whatnot. So, we kind of get the point. Does anybody have any other quick comment they want to make about the comparison with this? Yes.
Well, I think it's really thinking about the audience in the sense of understanding who you're writing to and making sure that you're thinking about how to communicate to them so that they understand what you're trying to say.
Right. So Jody, right?
Yeah.
So Jody, one of the things that you're making me think about is I'm not going to keep going back to the ERWC stuff, but they have a new template for their writing assignments. And I was looking at that the other night, and they've added a couple more elements. And so one of the things that I think is really interesting for people like me who are putting things in books for other people, or if it's, like all of you, I believe, are, rolling out of here into positions of influence and leadership in one way or another for your school or your district or your department, through the extension of the great good work of the Writing Project and the Wright Center. And so when we think about the forms in which we want to construct these things, it raises interesting questions, right? So here's a template, in other words, that like this is what it looks like every day for the most part. You just change the ingredients. So one of the interesting questions I think for you to answer on your own is there a reason, is there a value for you in your context to develop some kind of a template to try to increase the consistency, not like lock-in, but kind of consistency in the implementation of the kinds of the writing assignments that you want, whether it's a template in developing one or a template for the actual assignments, right? Even if it's just as simple as what are they going to do before, what are they going to do during, what are they going to do after. but or if it's checklists. But I think it raises interesting questions. These check boxes, so you have the sequential thing here, like go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then if there's a checkbox, you're supposed to be able to check that off, right? It's not like a bullet point. So I think one of the side conversations that we have going on for us present in the room today, and a lot of the people out in live stream land is what are the forms that we need to think about creating to implement, to ensure a consistent, effective implementation of the ideas that you're trying to share. Does that make sense? Okay. So let's roll ahead, and we'll just do this as a group instead of going into tables. I don't know how we'll handle the mic, but maybe just speak up a little bit. So what are some of the questions that come up when we talk about academic writing assignments? Any aspect of it. Just what are some of the questions that come up for you when you think about academic writing assignments? Yes, Lauren.
What are the skills I'm hoping my students are going to have cultivated?
So what are the skills, right? So maybe I'll try to reiterate for the instead of the mic. So what are some of the skills that we're trying to cultivate? And that's really goes back to what I was just saying about the transfer of learning and things like that. For us to even call that out for ourselves, right? To be more intentional, more deliberate. Like, what am I actually, trying to convey? What are we trying to improve on? And maybe how does that relate to what we were doing before, right? Yes?
What skills transfer from one assignment to the next?
What skills transfer from one assignment to the next? Or if we're, like some of us are working, in schools across a couple different grade levels. So for the last umpteen years, I've been teaching seniors. So one of the questions is, what are those same skills that were at the junior level or the 7th grade level? Now I'm designing something for the 8th grade, the 12th grade. What does that look like? And is that higher? Is it more complex, but is it clear that it's related to that thing before, right? So yeah, Catherine.
Motivation and engagement.
What is that? Say a little more about that.
Sometimes there are academic writing assignments that absolutely kids don't have any interest in writing. How do we create assignments that engage them and motivate them to actually want to write these?
Yeah, it's a huge piece, right? This is not. It was the trickiest. When I wrote this book, I was like basically hunting around the copy room at my school, and I was looking at other schools, and I saw things. I read about this book. I saw things here and there where my inner bad high school student really came back up to the surface. Like, I would definitely not be doing that assignment, right? My go-to example is this assignment for Lord of the Flies that I picked up somewhere along the way for chapter 11. That had 10 questions about chapter 11, which is maybe 15 pages long. And it wasn't one of those, it wasn't 10 questions, it was one of those deals where it was 30, because question 1 was, who's Piggy? What is his relationship to all the other boys? And what does he represent, relative to Western civilization or something like that? And that's question number 1. So you can write a whole essay about that, and there's 9 more. And then the next day I see there's chapter 12, the same thing. Oh my God. I would be online so fast, I wouldn't even do that. I would just not do it. But so the engagement piece is huge. It's huge, yes?
How do we create instructional scaffolds for the writing assignments that are going to push the students into their zone of proximal development and keep them from backing off?
Yeah, so how do we design assignments that are going to put them, and also I think this is part of what you're implying, relative to wherever they are in growth. So I have 35 kids in a senior class. That's a lot of different starting points, right? It's a lot of kids who had been in AP classes, and they don't want to be in AP classes anymore as seniors. So I've got those kids. I've got kids with struggling learning difficulties and everything in between. And so how do you design something so that everybody can kind of enter into the dance kind of at the point that they are? Yeah.
What is meant by academic writing? That's always a big question I have.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a, I guess I'm not answering them, but I think one of the things is that we want to kind of keep that open, right, and not narrow it down. So other, one or two more questions. Yes? What are the knowledge demands that kids need to have about the text that they might be writing about, right? So one of the things you also kind of bring up is just the reading piece. that's kind of implied in academic writing assignments, because one of the things that I think is fundamental to the academic writing task is, by and large, there's some one or set of texts that they're somehow, the reading is involved, right? I'm trying to make sense of that. Yes?
How can I engage my students in becoming sort of self-assessors of their own growth over time to, create more ownership and sense of self-efficacy?
Yeah, and just to build on that, I think that idea of their own awareness of what is involved. Like, that was one of the things I was reading last night about the transfer of learning, was if you don't articulate what it is that you want to be transferring, then they're not going to know what it is they're supposed to be paying attention to and kind of internalizing that. And so, any transfer kind of becomes a happy accident, especially if what you're calling it keeps changing. Right? So those are all great questions. So here's what I want you to do. And I realize some of you might not be in the classroom on a day-to-day basis. Some of you might be working as TOSAs. Some of you might be, working more at the district level. So if you're not writing about your own class, then what I would do is just write about assignments that you saw this last year in teachers' classes that you thought were working really well, and those that could be improved, right? So these are my kids, this is what education looks like in California. We go out in the sun. I have a picture of my kids riding on a football field. I love showing that slide when I'm talking in Texas. Texas people are like, that's what you guys use a football field for? I could eat that little kid right there as a snack. So the first thing I want you to do is to just make a list, not like each, on Tuesday we do this, on Wednesday we do this, but just the kind of types of essays. So one example might be my seniors write roughly 3 to 4 timed independent reading essays over the course of the year, right? So they've got a period, they're writing a book they chose themselves as it relates to what we call the expert project, kind of a year-long inquiry. So they're 4 timed. So I would just say, in-class timed writing assignments about independent reading would be an example of something. So make a list of assignments that your kids did in the last year. If you're, kind of using a journal, just kind of have some generic way of representing that. And again, if you aren't in the class, then just kind of write down representative examples from classes you've been in. And you could do this as you're going along or when you finish the list. I want you to identify the one assignment that you think was the most effective, or at least super effective, that you want to think about throughout the rest of the morning. And one assignment that was, let's just say it was very 1.0-ish, right? Has a lot of potential that hasn't yet been fully realized, and so it's worth kind of going back to. So when you're ready, indicate one that was most effective, and one that was, for want of a better term, least effective so far. And when you're ready, turn and talk to, we won't do a whole table for this, just turn and talk to one person, or if you have odd numbers, then 3 of you, and share the one assignment that went so well. Give people enough of a sense of what that was. If somebody goes, oh, that's really interesting, I'd love to, can you share that assignment with me? I'd really love to look at something like that. Then there's a little sharing as well for that. But share with each other, just talking, what was most effective about it? What do you even mean when you say it was most effective? And what was it about the one that was least effective that stands out for you? So when you're ready, have that conversation. We'll take a couple minutes for that. Okay, so let's come back together and talk and kind of keep going. It's a lot to report out from, but just is there anything that somebody feels they can identify that's common to the ones that were effective? Whatever the element was, something that seems to come up consistently amongst the ones that you were talking with in your group that were really effective. Yes.
Exciting content that engages the students. There was a question about motivation and engagement earlier, like how do you get the students, how do you pull them in? She was talking about spoken word poetry and had her 7th graders and her 11th graders engage in that activity. And they came from like pretty much a zero knowledge base. They didn't even know what spoken word poetry was at the beginning. And by the end, she said they blew her away with their breadth and depth and their creative ingenuity, what they brought, and they had to memorize them and perform them. So.
Right, so you also had what we might call that happy accident. So Jen was talking about in her, what grade was that in?
Oh, 7th grade.
In her 7th grade class, doing this creative narrative unit where the kids had to write about, some outer space, some kind of science fiction story, and they all started writing about basically the destruction of the world, the universe, and then the next unit in their science class was climate change. And so there was like this accidental dovetailing, which then she and the science teacher realized, like, oh man, next year we have to really get a lot more intentional about that because it made such a bigger impact on the kids. So even that kind of thing, I think, is a really good example of, keeping the discussion open and towards greater intentionality. What a couple other things that come up common to the effective assignments? Yes. Choice. Choice is so huge, but it has to be legitimate choice, right? And we'll talk more about it, but it has to be legitimate choice, and it has to be a meaningful choice. My favorite example of bad choice or no choice at all is some story I heard a long time ago about this teacher that said they're reading To Kill a Mockingbird, and this girl was in the class, and she'd read it like 100 times before she got to high school. And so the teacher said, we're going to read To Kill a Mockingbird. She's like, yes, I love that story. So she reads it, and they do all this stuff, and they come into class finally at the end, and they have to write an essay. And the prompt is write an essay in which you argue who is the most important character in the book and explain why. That's the topic, right? Who is the most important? So choice. So she writes this 47-page essay in 10 minutes because she knows this book so well. I'm sure her tongue was like sticking up sideways. She's like leaning into it. And she turns it in, and she gets it back in a week, and it's a C. And she goes up to the teacher and says, a C? What do you mean, a C? And she says, well, honey, you got it wrong. She said, what do you mean I got it wrong? She said, you said scout. The correct answer is Atticus. She's like, you said make a choice. So it's some sort of perverted form of bait and switch, right? But it has to be a meaningful switch. And you can imagine what happened to that girl's kind of faith and engagement over the rest of the semester, right? So there's a lot of other things we could talk about, but I just think it's really important for us to keep these different ideas in mind as we go along. The other thing that I want you to think about, just in a general way, is the sequence over the course of the year, right? I think this is, this is something that I think we've probably have all gotten a lot more, at least aware of on some level, than maybe we were in the past with the Common Core. This idea of kind of a progression, and so it doesn't matter whether you teach the Common Core or not. But this question of like, are kids doing things as the year goes along that are at higher, more complex levels than they were earlier on, right? Part of this is a transfer of learning. So if they're, so I have the kind of this arbitrary level of complexity. So when you see kids writing where's that example of one? Their independent reading essay, somewhere in there. Maybe it disappeared, but right here. So that's write about this book you chose and how that relates to your expert project topic. That's it. So that's kind of at a level 4. When they write about the next one, I put that up a level because now when they write about that, they have to write about the second book they read, how it relates to the first one, and what both of those are saying. So there's a progression of complexity. Now they're having to write about 2 texts, and it's the same prompt, right? So the prompt is not varying, but the level of complexity is. And then when they get to the ones in the spring, they have to write about wherever it is. They have to write about all 3 or 4 of those, and part of that ends up laying the foundation for this big expert project paper they're reading. So I want you to think about that, for a second with your assignments, and ask yourself: is there, a progression of complexity, for want of a better word, right? Am I making greater cognitive demands? Now, I'll tell you, when I first started thinking about this one year, I thought, okay, I'm going to be very deliberate. So the first paper is going to be 1 to 2 pages, and then the next one's going to be 2 to 3, and the next one's going to be 3 to 4. I am going to be so organized and structured. And then I thought, I don't like where that's going. You're going to be like, and then 18 to 19 pages, and then 60 to 61 pages. This is not going anywhere pretty. So then I started thinking about, is length necessarily a function of complexity? Right? And so obviously, all your there's a lot of head nodding in the room for those of you who can't see. You start looking at that, and then you go back to the intentionality of the design, right? I need to design this thing with myself in mind as well as the person who's going to have to respond to and work with it, so that I don't necessarily end up with 500 pieces of paper I have to look at every week. So this idea, and this is another part of the transfer of learning, this idea of what do I want to be transferring across as it goes up. So by the time they get to the expert project essay, which is a 10-page plus paper that draws a lot of these things along, they've been prepared to be able to do that really complex performance. Anybody have any questions about this? All right, so let's dive down into those writing assignments that you looked at. Right? So you made a list of writing assignments, right? There's kind of my list of writing assignments. These are what I think of as performances, right? They're not like little practice things. They're kind of a complete performance in one way or another. So let's go into this idea of the different kinds of writing assignments. So I looked at about an 18-inch stack of writing assignments, mostly English, from all over the place. And I began sorting them, and what I realized is they fall into these 6 categories. You've got writing to learn, which we'll talk more about. You've got short answer. You've got writing on demand. You've got a process paper. Some of them are not mutually exclusive, right? So a process paper can be, obviously a research paper is going to have some element of a process to it, but a process paper is going to go through some version of the writing process, a longer form, and then alternative forms. So let's talk about those a little bit, and as I go through them, I want you to look at your list of assignments, and I want you to ask yourself, do I have, little bit like academic writing bingo, do I have, can I get blackout? Right? And so let's look at these a little bit closer. So writing to learn, for the most part, I think of it doesn't have to be a notebook, but this is stuff that you can be doing it daily. Most days I have my kids writing in class. It might be practicing something. It might be doing some writing to think. So it can be used to make sense of what students read. It can be very informal. My kids kind of have a hybrid paper notebook and then what we call a digital daybook. It's like a Google Doc, and then at the end of the period, grading period, they print that up and put those together. I think in general, in a science class, this would be a lab notebook, for instance, and things like that. You are not necessarily giving the greatest emphasis to the quality of the writing unless you're actually doing some kind of writing practice, for kinds of sentences in an English class. So if you think of it, look at those assignments, kind of go down your list and ask yourself, like somebody was, I think you were saying, having kids doing like reading response logs with your students. So I would kind of assume that falls into the writing to learn, depending on how you configured it. You've got short answer, which are going to be anywhere from a sentence to a paragraph. They might appear on an assessment, but they might not. I have a tendency a lot of times, not always, to have kids write paragraphs kind of in increments that actually are building an essay. I call it the progressive dinner party paper. So they might have where you kind of go house to house. And so they might have a paragraph they write about chapter 1 and what that paragraph has to say about freedom in Into the Wild. And they go to the next paragraph, the next chapter, and they basically are writing another paragraph about what is Krakauer saying about freedom in that. And by the time they get to the end, they've got a bunch of paragraphs. They basically have a bunch of body paragraphs, have them pull out the ones that they think kind of cohere, arrange them, write an intro and a draft and a conclusion, and then they have a draft. So what's important about that is these different types can kind of bundle into each other, right? So what starts as a short answer can actually be a building block towards a process paper, right? These can often have a little more of an emphasis on the quality of the writing, at least in an English class. Says, means, and matter is like becoming more and more like my go-to thing. Like, what are you saying, or what is the author saying? What do they mean, or what do you mean? And why does it matter? Why does what this person is saying matter, or why is what you are saying matter? There's some stuff in they say, I say about that, but it's such a useful memorable acronym, I just have to be sure that, like, if the superintendent comes in, it doesn't sound like I'm doing my S&M unit. And so articulation is important. Or if you're working more with like claims, reasoning, and evidence format, but there's more of an emphasis, depending on how you structure it, on the content, or if you're going to do it kind of in that paragraph like I'm talking about, then there's more of an emphasis on the quality of writing. So to look at your writing, your list, and ask yourself, I'm pretty sure, I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure if I remember correctly, was it Bruce Metzger, who examined college writing assignments, found that the short answer was the most common form of writing at the freshman college level. I'm pretty sure that was his finding, which was surprising to me. Writing on demand is something that we're all too familiar with, right? I mean, this is one of the things that Arthur Appleby found and Judith Langer found was kind of choking a lot of the writing instruction. So this basically means anything that's being done under time, whether it's practice AP tests, whether it's actual like my in-class essays on independent reading, but it's writing under the pressure of time, under the constraint of time, and whether the quality of the writing matters is a function of what you're trying to accomplish. Sometimes, like I'll notice in the social studies classes, there can often be less of an emphasis on the quality of the writing because they're preparing them more to deliver the content. And so I think there are ways for us to have important conversations about, like, if you're doing leadership stuff, to help them see there's ways to address that, right? Like show them some of the movements. So I think the thing to watch for on your list is whether or not you have that's predominating, right? And the other thing I was saying before about the way these things can roll over is how can a writing, anybody want to answer this? Because how can a writing on demand essay type of writing assignment, how can that become another kind of writing assignment?
You have the kids turn it into a process paper, so it becomes the initial draft, and then they use it as a way to revise.
They do, and there's a couple things about that I think, boy, you should be the director of the Wright Center. You have such good answers. She's the plant in the audience. So what's important about that also, like going back to my classes, I have mostly have 35 kids in the class, right? And they're all seniors. And like I said, I have everything from AP kids to kids who have a special ed person with them, and some English transitional students and things like that. And so the opportunity for that writing on demand piece to not be terminal, right? So on the one hand, it's satisfying the need to hold them accountable for the independent reading book, but then there's this chance to, if you want to call it, rescue themselves or continue their learning, to roll that over and become then a process paper where they're going to get all the feedback and they're going to get all that other benefits. Then it really, it really changes the nature of the class, right? Then the classroom feels like a place where they're safe to learn. They're not going to be, have a consequence. How you handle the grading of those things, is up to you. But, and the question, if you're teaching an AP class, like, do you teach your class as a test prep class, right? Where you're just writing practice AP essays all year long. Like that's a strategy that some people use, and they say we'll write for our own purposes after it's finished. I don't know what that looks like, since there's 3 weeks left in there, especially if they're seniors. Like, no, I'm good. So writing on demand is a big issue, and then the process papers raise other issues, right? So process papers are those writing assignments, kind of long or short, that require students to draft and revise their work in some way. So if you go back to Carol's example, the timed the writing on demand piece that you then roll over and say, now we're going to go back through, we're going to take this draft of your essay, turn it into a backwards outline, go through and revise and enhance it, and take another week or two. It's up to you, but becoming a process, I tend to try to use the process for as many papers as possible. Like, to me, the assignments themselves are the context in which to teach the writing. So there's very, very few assignments in my class that don't function in some level as the context to teach them those things for writing. And then also, because of those kids with special needs or whatever else might be going on, that chance to loop back around and, both help lift them up as well as rescue themselves. Because otherwise, if you have a writing intensive class, kids for whom it's difficult can drown so quickly that they just can give up, right? So it's not so much a distinct type of writing assignment, it's just an instructional approach. So I take time, on a 2 to 3 page essay, we might take a week and a half to write that, because I'm going to, for instance, the first paper, you've got a sample of this assignment in your packet, writing a paper about mindset. We take a couple days to talk about introductions. And what I do is I give them a handout. This is not in the packet, but it might be in the book. I have this handout that says, like, here's 6 or 7 different ways to begin your paper, like introductions. And especially because I know I have seniors coming in, and maybe some of them are still kind of hanging on to these formulaic approaches to how to begin a paper. There are 3 key aspects of the mindset, and I really feel like it's important for me to get them out of that, but they don't know what it looks like. So I write 7 different introductory paragraphs for that paper to show them what it looks like to begin with a question, what it looks like to begin with a quotation, what it looks like to begin the same paper with an anecdote. And so I think in that respect, your leadership to your students as well as to your colleagues, to show them to demystify it, right? To show them what does that look like? Like, I know you're thinking, like, how else could you begin a science paper? How else could you begin a history paper? But if you look at, I'm reading the Robert Caro's biography of Lyndon Johnson. It opens up with an anecdote. It opens up with a story. So anyway, the process paper, creates a lot of different instructional opportunities. And then you get to the research paper, which is becoming, I think, more complicated in different ways in terms of the pressures of time. But for me, teaching seniors in particular, I think it's really important. So my kids are writing roughly 10-page papers. And just to give you a sense of the results of that, so if I had 100 seniors this last year like I did, the process I take them through incrementally, working back through feedback throughout that, over the course of about a month, even though we've kind of prepared all year long, I had 2 kids that didn't do the paper. And they had like 8 different models to look at. We had a lot of work. There was, you had to try to fail that paper. And there's a lot of emphasis. And to me, what I love about this is I want a sense of moment. I want a sense of achievement. So when you go back to engagement, one of the things that I think we have to think about with writing is, where is that moment that a kid is going to feel like, I did this, I made this, this is proud work, right? Like, I wrote this story, I wrote this rap, whatever it is that is my creation, and there's a sense of ownership. And to go back to the middle tables here, there are thoughts about voice, and even kind of engaging, what Parker Palmer would call some of the soul of learning and things like that. That's where some of that stuff kicks in. And I totally believe that there's room, for writing. I mean, I have kids writing 10-page papers on every, conceivable topic imaginable, right? From beauty to global warming and everything in between. So then you get to alternative forms, which I think is where we are in a lot of ways now, where we're looking at what are the new forms that digital technology allows us to do, or that maybe connections to the real world are kind of challenging us to do, right? Kids don't have to go out and write so many academic essays in the real world, but they have to make these moves, right? So I tend to think of these, what Jerry Graff and his wife, Kathy Burke, call, the moves of academic writing. So, throughout all these, mostly what I'm kind of thinking about are, what are the moves, the thinking moves, the writing moves that I want kids to be able to make. So I'm going to show you a couple quick examples just to demystify that, and then we can kind of go from there. But to me, the long form in that previous one, these are papers, but not mixed media things in general. If you want to make a mixed media, kind of long form variation on something, then I think that's to some extent a different piece. So alternative forms may share certain moves and purposes with traditional academic writing. They might be everything from PowerPoints to social media pieces. They might have real world connections such as resumes. but they all matter. So I want you to think about, I don't know why I have a domination of food this morning, but you have the kids on a writing diet, right? Like this is what they ate in your class as writers in the last year. And I think those go back to the questions of engagement, like how did it taste, right? Like did the kids feel like they had a whole year of kale? Right? Nothing against kale. I saw a cartoon recently that was like a tombstone, and then this woman's name and then the date suggested that she died like maybe at about 32 or something, and then the epigraph on it was all that kale for nothing. So if you somebody was talking about was that you? Somebody was talking about no, this guy was getting together with yesterday. He was talking about the vegetables of assignments. Like sometimes there's nothing about punctuation, if I'm trying to teach you that's going to be fun. Get over it. Like I can't try to do that. But you're not going to be able to make this move if you don't know how to if you don't know how to use a semicolon or whatever it was that he was talking about. So if we think about if we kind of adapt this, that was the best I could do. I don't have fancy photoshopping skills. If we think about the writing diet, like what do you notice? So take a second and just turn to a neighbor and process a little bit about what you noticed. Like, do you feel like, yeah, my writing diet for my kids was a little heavy on the carbs of the writing diet with the writing on demand, or does it look balanced, or are there things that simply aren't there, but maybe there's a reason for why they're not there, right? So just quickly just share with each other. What do you notice about the diet that you had kids write for in this last year, or whatever stretch of time you're looking at? So how's our diet? We have a balanced?
I was just starting to think about. I feel like I put a lot of emphasis in trying to engage my students who have been they've so someone before me has killed writing, and I feel like someone after me is about to kill writing and looking at where they're going. And so I feel like it might seem like I have a junk food diet going on, but I really don't think I do. But I feel like I'm perceived that way. So I guess that's my answer. Is I think people perceive that, but I really feel like I take meaningful steps to
So I think what's interesting about that, especially when you guys start looking to the idea of going out in your school or through the program and providing leadership, I think what it means is to go into that, right, and unpack that. So here's an example from my class that a lot of people would think is junk food, and let's look at the thinking behind that, and understand what I think we're actually doing and why I'm doing that in that place, right? And I think that's where you kind of come back to that intentionality. Jeff Wilhelm wanted to write a book called "Let Them Read Junk," but and maybe he wrote it, but they wouldn't let him use that title. But he wanted to let them read junk, let them read whatever they want. No.
I don't have any parts, so I go to the end.
Right.
Go, what do I want you to accomplish? Then I figure out the pieces that are in there. Then I make some adjustments based on engagement and motivation. Then I figure out the sequence to build it.
Sure.
So my plate wouldn't look like that.
I think it's a great point. It shouldn't, right? It's not the natural food plate isn't, right. So I'm gonna pick up on that in a minute because I think it's a really important point, right? And part of the point is simply to be to be more mindful and intentional about that, right? So, but that's I don't mean to imply that there should be equal shares, right? So let's come back and let's get back together. We've got about 9 more minutes with our friends out there in live stream land. Great to have you all here with us. And so Catherine brought up a really important point. Catherine, you want to make your point about, because this is kind of sort of divided into equal shares. So Catherine, what were you just saying?
Well, in my writing class, I don't have equal shares. I figure out where I'm headed in terms of what I want kids to learn, and then maybe alternate forms is larger or smaller than short answer.
Right.
So that's where I'm headed with students.
So I think it's such an important observation because I don't mean to imply that they should, have equal sections. That's just probably the only way I knew how to break the plate up or something. But no, there should be more. Partly depends on the class, right? Partly depends on the grade level, and whatnot. But I think the idea is to simply be aware, like, wow, okay, I have a lot of stuff going on, and like more than I realize, right? Like one of the things, it's so interesting, when you just keep track of something, right? Like one year, I kept track, I don't know why I started at the beginning of the year, keep track of every single thing that came in to take instructional time from my class. Like I got so picky about it. And, so if somebody came from the counseling office with like 8 little yellow slips, summonses, I would just lean over and write like 30 seconds, C for counselor summons or something like that. And at the end of the year, I tallied it all up, including days for state testing. It added up. My periods are 51 minutes. It added up to 30 hours, cumulatively, right? Cumulatively of time. It's like extended lunch for the fashion show, for the prom, whatever. Like it's only 7 minutes. You can imagine the activities director was not, when I shared it with the principal, was not like, loving me. But the whole point is to simply develop an awareness of, wow, like when I list out what I'm having the kids do, it turns out I'm having a lot of them do a lot of this, and I'm not saying don't do whatever that is. I'm just saying like go back and be more intentional about it, right? So let's talk about, because in the time that we have left, there's probably this is a good way to transition towards things. So to explain this diagram, the colored arrows across the top basically represent our kids coming in to this box. Can be our classroom, it can be a text. It could be the assignment that we want them to do, but it's what we want the kids to get into and where we want something good to happen, right? So if they're coming into my class, when they come into my class, am I going to have them do writing assignments while they're in there? They're going to make their brains look like that. The crowd's much bigger in here than it appears from the cameras. And of course, we wish we only had 3 different kinds of kids coming in. Wouldn't that be nice? Maybe. I don't. And so what do you think this broken red line represents? What do you think?
Entry points?
Entry points, but, that is, but what about that? What if it's almost like if you, I'm dating myself, if you played Pong, like what's going to happen if you kind of don't go there, you hit there, So Lauren, you look like you were thinking about raising your hand. Say it again, sorry. You lose. So that's getting more specific, but that's a perfectly good example. So say more about what's one of the reasons why we might lose kids trying to get them into this thing we want them to do. Past experience, right. So we could just call it kind of the whole, affective, emotional side. Like I have past experiences with that, and you are offering me up a big bowl of shame and humiliation, and I'm just saving myself the time, right? I'm going straight back to Mr. and Ms. So-and-so in 8th grade, and, no, I'll just take the F right now. So have you ever heard that Brian Regan or some comedian or something like that? He does this whole thing about a science fair, and he just waited until the last minute, and he comes in with a cup of dirt. That's all he has, like a cup of dirt. They're supposed to be working on it all year long. The teacher comes along, he goes, I'll just take the F. Just give me the F. So he's got all these experiences about the humiliation of school. So the emotional stuff, whatever it might be, past experiences, we like look in there, we go like, oh, that's what you're going to have me do? No, I'm not going. And they just withhold for whatever reason. Are there other reasons why that prevent kids from going in? On some level, like maybe they eventually get in, but at least kind of initial resistance. Yes.
Well, even if you're like an English language learner or special ed, like you may not have the academic vocabulary to be able to access the things that you want them to do.
Sure. Well, you bring up several, right? So part of what you said is if you're an English learner or if you have special needs, you might not have the academic language, but you might also have cognitive processing disorders, whatever it might be, that also prevent you. So if reading is a big issue, I had a girl this year who just did phenomenal work in my class, but she had some serious cognitive difficulties. So she had to do audio with all the books. But she was a cool young woman. She got an A in the class, and she was a dirt car racer. Like, whoa, Lauren, like what a badass. So once she could use audio to get in, then she was fine. But if she had to do something in class, it was a problem. What if and then you brought up English learners, right? So cultural experiences, cultural knowledge, background knowledge, previous experiences, etc. All that kind of stuff. Yeah, Jody.
I teach gifted, and I feel sometimes they don't want to look too smart. So it's not cool to be too smart. So I have to really work on creating an activity that's engaging, that they all feel comfortable kind of putting themselves out there and taking risks and being smart.
I think that's so huge. So probably we got about 3 minutes left, so I want to make sure I get a couple points. So probably one of the best books that I've read in the last couple of years about just teaching in general, even not just teaching, is Tom Newkirk's Embarrassment. And the subtitle is The Emotional Underlife of Learning. He was actually my editor on the 6 academic writing assignments. But part of what you're talking about is just reminds us of how emotionally fraught writing assignments can be, whether it's past baggage of things or the things you're asking them to write about that we think are safe, but for them are not safe at all. So let me end by clarifying this idea of friction points, because this is a good place to address that. So there's bad friction points when you're designing a writing assignment. Bad friction points are the things, partly like Jody's talking about, bad friction points are the things that kids are going to rub up against, they're going to snag themselves on, they're going to prevent them from doing it or doing it well or getting in, or like, I'm not going in there. It's kind of like you get your belt loop, snagged for, it could be a cognitive thing like language, it could be a cultural thing, whatever reason it might be, and it's going to either prevent them from getting in the first place, or, it's like a gate for which they don't have the ticket, or when they get in, you're asking them to do things to engage in processes or performances I don't know what that looks like, right? So we have to anticipate, and that's why I think I find the design stuff so interesting. We have to anticipate those aspects and design for them. So if we're saying like, this is at a whole new level, right? So like you were talking, let's see. Emily was talking about like rolling with her, her kids from K to 6. So with 6th grade, she may need to say like, okay, they don't know what it looks like at this level, even though we did that last year in 5th grade. So I need to anticipate that and have an example to show them this at a higher level if I want them to get there. So we've got to anticipate all these different things. Those are to kind of short circuit the bad friction points, the things that might prevent. What do you think it means to talk about good friction points? The friction points you want to bake in. Another food analogy, I know. Yes, Jody.
Well, I think that when students understand that the brain is a muscle, and that when you have these moments of challenge, that you're actually pushing yourself to other levels. I think when they are aware, you're being intentional about what's happening. And I think when they have supports in place, the classroom environment, whether it's how their peers treat them, the teacher treats them, that they know that they have support to be able to push through, and that they're going to be proud of themselves for that next step.
And you've given them a way up and a way in, right? So it's a little bit like chutes and ladders. Like, oh, just when I was afraid I was going to go hit the slide, like I've got this ladder to kind of get me up to that next level, right? So positive friction points are just those things basically that you want to ensure. It could be even other texts, right? Like if you feel like, oh, I've got all these texts from all these people of a certain group, whatever that might be, and so I want to ensure that I get a couple other perspectives in there, so they have a friction point with the fact that not everybody sees it the same way. Even if you're looking at a global warming unit, like I want to build in what do the people that have a very different view say about those things. And then when we're coming out of that, we've got, maybe this is the presentation, maybe this is the alternative writing assignment, maybe this is the timed writing assignment, maybe this is the major paper. So whichever one of these performances we want them to do, after they've kind of been in there doing all this reading and other kinds of work, then there may be a whole other set of obstacles that are in their way. And to some extent, I would just go back to the design of the writing assignment and then the models, like, do they know what it looks like? So, but I like this diagram because I think, it makes us mindful of we're designing something, we're designing an experience. Right? This is like my big idea about the idea of design. You're designing an experience for the kids, and you're designing one for yourselves. You're designing one for yourself in the sense of that involves, like 1 year, I got all computers in my classroom, like a Google cart, and so I thought, okay, I'm going all in on the tech. I'm going to be Mr. T. And by the end of the semester, it's like, oh my God, I'm going out and buying a bunch of typewriters now. Because I was doing all this stuff, partly with the paperless and whatever else, and I gave no consideration whatsoever to how the time it was going to take and the impact on me having to look at them all and having to look at them all on screens, right? The average teenager looks at screens an average of between 8 and 9 hours a day. And so when we start designing experiences where I want you to write this paper and I want you to get in, I want you to do it in Google or whatever other program, and I want you to use Noodle tools for your research paper. Well, now I've added a layer of friction points that I probably have to spend a bunch of time teaching them to use. And then does that mean I'm going to have to go in and look at all their Noodle work? So I've added hours. So I'm not speaking against it, but I'm just saying to be mindful and attentive about it. So now I'm adding to the number of hours that potentially that they're looking at screens, and I'm adding to the number of times that maybe I have to be somewhere where I have to have access to the internet to be able to look at that stuff. So the efficiency in my own life is getting complicated, and so we're designing their experience as well as our own. I just think it's profoundly important to be aware of that. Yes?
So that's one of the things I've had a hard time wrapping my head around is this friction points, and that is helpful, but I would really appreciate it if you took a content one, like either your Into the Wild lesson or your expert project. Could you talk about a negative friction point you anticipated kids would have in doing either one of those projects, and then what you built in to push them through?
So let me give you, thank you. So let me give you 2 examples, because I think one of the types of writing assignments that is least intuitive to people are some of the alternative forms. So in the expert project, they pick a topic at the beginning of the year. They have to write a proposal, and we look at real life proposals, and I tell them this is such an important part. Carol Booth Olson could not get any of the millions and millions she's gotten through grants if she couldn't write an effective proposal. And so then the kids have to write up surveys, or they can do some research and some other things. And then they get this data that I want them to then have to translate into and convey. So at some point, a couple of years ago, I came across this 4-page executive summary. Like, oh God, I love that document. Teachers are so weird, right? Like, we can be at dinner in a restaurant, like, I like this menu. There's some cool potential for we're gonna do a To Kill a Mockingbird menu thing. I'm thinking, and so anyway, I really like this idea a lot. It's writing it's real world writing, right? And it's in the sense that they have to learn how to say a lot in a little space. And so I took this sample and I tweaked it and made a model of what it looked like in our class. So going back to Carol's question, friction points. This kind of writing is a friction point because it's not a kind of writing that they've done. I tell them, you cannot, on pain of death, you cannot go past that page. You only get, here's your key findings, and then that first key finding goes up there, and you have to have kind of your quantitative piece to support your finding, then here's the explanation. You cannot run over that page. You get one page, and so working on concision, and working on formatting, and working on even I make this a real design piece also, right? It has to fit this template, and that's a part of writing more and more these days. So these friction points of design stuff, this friction point of writing in block paragraphs in kind of more businessy, concise ways is one kind of a friction point. But I'm also trying to make it a positive friction point to force them to go back into their data, right? So they do this survey through, like we'll go on to SurveyMonkey or Google Forms and teach them. Like that's what this guy, the last name is Johnson, calls micro writing, right? Which is a bigger and bigger deal in the economy of attention that we're writing in, right? Like short things that do real work that you've got to be able to give a lot of thought to. And so when I have them write something like this is actually a second stage from taking the data from their surveys, and we went through a whole work process of writing the questions, right? Because as we all know, there's a tremendous art to the writing of, I mean, the questions are either going to be useful and yield clear data, or you're going to be like, whatever that question is about. And so the friction point here, the positive friction point, from my perspective, is to send them back into their data to force them to really do the thinking about that. And this is just then the form where they're kind of conveying the meaning of that data. Another form, so that's what a complete paper looks like. It got a little muddled in the transition from Keynote to PowerPoint, but that's what a complete document looks like. This is a different thing, but it's another example of an alternative assignment where the emphasis is on the move. So Nancy Dwart, guru of presentation, she's got a bunch of great books about presentation. She came up with a concept called slide docs. It's just one word, and you can download this template. And so my students were reading The Immortal Life of Henry Lacks, and we didn't have time to write a paper, right? Because we had to kind of transition to the big expert project paper. So I needed a form that I thought was going to allow me to teach a lot of things that I thought were useful for them, but also were going to force them to think in some different ways. So I created I think there's more than just these 6 pages, but I think there's maybe 8 pages, and they worked in groups. And so this template comes from Nancy Dwart, and then I went in and kind of tweaked it for my class, and then gave it to them as a template. And so they had to find art that was consistent with the title. Again, you're dealing with formatting. I was telling them like you cannot move these boundaries around. Like the layout of the document is important. So again, like writing in bullets, writing in more concise ways, parallel structure. There was a lot of different little friction points that were built in here. Whether it's the friction point of being able to talk about parallel, construction, whether it's the friction point of being able to work on concision, whether it's the friction point of having to go back in and look at art, right? Like to find images, and the kids found fascinating works of art, some of them based on HeLa cells to go in. And so this is a picture from Jacob Lawrence's The Great Migration series that we've been looking at. So these alternative forms are completely legitimate ways of interacting with an academic piece of writing. If you looked at it, what you would find is that I had baked in the kind of thinking moves and the writing moves that I want kids to make, but it's not, they didn't have to present it or anything. Slide docs the idea is basically PowerPoint slides that are designed to be read, not held up on the screen and presented.
Was it supposed to be a book review, or what exactly was the content?
What was the assignment? The assignment was for them to take that question. Actually, you know what? I've got where's that? So these correspond with, I think it'll show up in a second. So these correspond with this paper that might not be told. There it is. So Francis Ford Coppola came out with a super cool book about a year or two ago called The Godfather Notebooks. And so this is Francis Ford Coppola's, the whole book is just photo scans of the pages from Mario Puzo's novel and his notes that he used to turn it into a film. And so what he did in the book is he has, these are Francis Ford Coppola's pieces. So he basically, for every scene, he would identify a synopsis, how is it constructed, what is it about the times of that moment that he felt he needed to consider for the shot, the imagery and tone, what is the core idea of that scene. Like he felt like there should be this, he called it a red something, there should be this core idea that you say that is the moment in that scene, that it's the emotional center of it. what are the pitfalls. So he was really obsessed with Italians not being stereotyped, right? Because he's a very proud Italian. So he was always trying to identify, and then texture and so forth. So what I did, thanks for reminding me about that. So what I did is I gave the kids that as the guideline for how I wanted them to respond in this. So these correspond with those different elements of the Francis Ford Coppola piece. It's really interesting to go through, even if you don't like the Godfather that much. And then it allowed for a good end. So when we think about these assignments in a general way, right? Trying to put a little bit of a wrap on that. We've got these 6. So going back to Catherine's comment, like there's do whatever you want, but do it with intention, right? And like the thing that I was just going over with Henry Lax, the intention there was I don't have time. We don't have time to write a paper. We've got this big 10-page paper. We've got to start next week. I can't have a big giant stack of papers that I've got to grade in the way that I might otherwise, because I've got to have more of my energy for the demands of the paper. So so there's probably it's an alternative form. It was not a process per se. To some extent, you could kind of argue that some of the pieces maybe conform to short answer, but there's a lot of thinking moves in there. So design always functions within constraints, right? Constraints are time. Constraints are, well, we don't have that fancy software. We're just using Google Docs or whatever. And we're designing an experience, right? Like when you have the kids do the raps, right? You're designing like, I want to have this experience. I want them to experience this content in this way. And when you think, Jen, when you think to next year and you realize like, oh man, we've got to totally get together ahead of time and like collaborate on that science unit, like this has become so much, like we could design a twice as good and deep experience with that idea in mind. Right? If you're what do you call it? Rolling with the kids over those many years, like to be able to design. Talk about beginning with the end in mind. Where do I want these little cherubs that I have in kindergarten to end up in 6th grade, and to be the one that gets to kind of map out that course is kind of high design. Somebody had a comment. Annabelle?
How do you assess the alternative forms?
It's a good question. So. In the packet, there might not be the rubric for it, but basically, the clarity of the writing, the concision of the writing, the content of the writing, and looking like there's more of an emphasis on the moves in that context, because the design of the document is itself part of. So I tell the kids, like if you go over, if you change the template, right? Like I really try to drill down on some of that real world writing stuff, right? If Carol Booth Olson has to write a grant and it says use this size font, she's going to say yes, please, right? Like I tell the kids, if you're sending, like I've got seniors, you're sending your college application and they tell you that the signature has to be in blue ink, you just say, what color is your favorite blue? You don't say, well, whatever, like I don't have blue, like that. Then that's just one. That's how long they look at your application, like the time it takes them to throw it out. So it creates a context, and those are friction points from my perspective, right? Like, as somebody who has to write proposals, any reason you give them by not following the guidelines to just toss, like not even look at it. They just, thank you, one less I have to even look at. So designing that, so part of that designing that experience again is for ourselves. So I know that I'm going to have this stack of, basically 110+ page papers, beginning of April, and I'm committed to that. Like it's the harder part of the work, but that's an assessment of my work also, right? Like it takes a long time to read. If some kid writes an 18-page paper, I'm going to read that paper. It's an assessment of my work as well. If we think of the student as a user of our class, of our assignments, it's transformative, right? Even if that means a textbook that we might be using, or ERWC things and whatnot, pushing past the inspiration. So engagement is great, but it's not enough, right? And so this idea, I always have to honor him, Ernest Morel brought this up in a meeting that I was in. He said, we've talked so often about getting kids to the inspiration point, but I want to know what we're doing to get them to the perspiration point. Because if engagement is fine, but if you show up to college, if you manage to get in and all you had is inspiration, you're not ready to push through. And so when you look as part of that design process, that goes back to the friction points. Like, where are the places where they're going to struggle? Like, intentionally and deliberately, and then what support do I need to put into place? And then just that emphasis on the intentionality of design, right? Whatever that might be. So I'll tell you, it's very, very interesting to me to be going to this new school in the fall, right? I mean, after 28 years at the school that I've been at, and these assignments that are in the book are all for my senior class. I'm, not a new teacher, but I'm the new guy, and it's very interesting to me to be, like, are you going to say, like, here's what we do? And then I look at these things and I think, like, okay, I suddenly realize in a way that I hadn't thought how much of our voice and our persona exists in our, like, I could not give a handout out that looked like that. I just couldn't do it, right? So I'll take it exactly as you do, but please let me use a different font or whatever. Like, my dad was in printing, so I've got like the design stuff matters a little bit to me, and the aesthetics of it as well. So that intentionality of these things. This is the piece that you're going to want to use kind of going forward, and maybe we can wrap up with that and then take questions. These are the elements that I developed for this framework when you're either assessing or designing frameworks. So this idea that the assignments are anchored in goals that are clearly specific standards, whether that's Common Core, whether it's AP, it doesn't matter to me. Right, but they're anchored in something, right? You're not just kind of floating around, kind of, well, that just seems like a fun thing to do. So have that level of intentionality. They're anchored in clear, specific standards that are appropriate to the student's age and development, as well as whatever future exams they might have to take. They need to honor that. Like I heard you guys talking over there about, well, the kids have to be able to come out and show their knowledge on some test that you were talking about. The idea that they're grounded in texts that are as engaging as they are demanding. Right, so I think we think a lot more about what are the cognitive demands that those texts are making, and if the texts themselves don't make, like ERWC is having people read Reina Grande's The Distance Between Us as a book as part of one of their units. So I'm reading it. It's one of our summer reading books actually, and I look at that, and it's a wonderful story, and I look at that and I think, like, wow, it would really depend on what the class was. Because the cognitive demands of the text, the rhetorical demands of the text don't seem, that much, at least for the kids that I'd be teaching. So I couldn't change the text. What I could change are the tasks, right, when we're designing. So sometimes we don't get to choose the text, but we can choose the tasks and the techniques that we're using when the kids read those. So cognitively demanding relative to the standards themselves and the student's progress without being overwhelming. And so anytime you get to that tipping point where the kids are in danger of just putting their hands over their head and feeling overwhelmed because I just don't know what this looks like, I don't know how to do this, then we have to plan with that in mind. Emotionally and intellectually engaging the students to the degree the assignments give some measure of choice. It's, I don't think this is an issue with anybody in this room, but I think when we go out and work with others, I think sometimes we're surprised to realize the extent to which people just don't even know what would that even look like? Like the kids could just pick any character in the book, I mean, when I was teaching AP, sometimes I would have them, like with Hamlet, I would say, pick any character you want, but it can't be basically any of the main characters. Like the smaller the character, almost the more peripheral and marginal and it's seemingly meaningless, the better. And then do the heavy lifting to kind of direct their attention in that way. There's got to be support in ways that the students might need to have those challenges, the writing tasks. So I write models if I don't have them. And I think that's that next page is what it looks like. I wrote this as a model for the kids. And then I annotated my model, explaining what I was doing. So that's one of the things that looks like. And then what does that do? It makes me a better teacher by design because it's forcing me, as some people say, do you eat your own dog food, right? If I have to go in and write my own assignment, and if I'm bored by it, I'm pretty sure that kids are probably going to be. And then how am I going to assess that up front, right? I want the kids knowing this is what matters, this is the criteria for it. When you go through the sample assignments in the packet, you'll see, for the most part, the criteria are spelled out there, and then written and formatted for maximum readability and ease of use in a language that's clear, consistent, concise, and correct, using a layout that makes clear what they need to do and when they need to do it. This is a big issue. Like you have some people, I love the environment, right? Big fan, going fly fishing tomorrow up in the north amongst the beautiful trees. But I'm willing to sacrifice a couple of tree limbs for paper if that's what kids need to be able to get the effective thing. Like kids read differently on screens. So if you are going to design things, if you are going to format them to be distributed digitally, you have to design, whatever that means, you have to design with that in mind so that that enhances the clarity and doesn't complicate it. If you want to use color, because screens will allow you to do that, that's great, but don't get carried away.
Because the live stream is going to end at 10:45,
Okay.
I want a couple
Sure.
of the virtual questions. And can you say out loud to people that are on the live stream where they go if they want to give a question?
Yes, if you want to click the question, feel free to click rightcenter.org on the events tab, and you can submit your questions at the link below on that page.
Okay.
But then you can also do the chat function. So our first question is from Crystal Kelly from the Central Texas Writing Project. Her question is, what suggestions do you have for defending the writing we know to work best with our students when agendas are asking us to assign writing for standardized testing or to stay aligned with our PLCs?
Well, my first thought was that I made that comment about the Texas football fields and my students, and I was worried that I offended her. So obviously I didn't. But that's a Texas-sized question. Could you read it one more time?
Sure. What suggestions do you have for defending the writing we know to work best with our students when agendas are asking us to assign writing for standardized testing or to stay aligned with our PLCs?
I think I think there's it's always tricky. There can be a lot of different pieces, but I think if you go back to like Carol's comment about the way you can take what was a writing on demand, a timed writing, a writing on demand piece that you can then roll over and make a process piece. So one of the things that comes up in that situation is that teacher, if they're part of a PLC and everybody else in the PLC is content kind of being terminal with that as a writing on demand thing, then is that teacher free? Do they have that liberty to then roll it over and say, like, I'm going to continue on with it because I've got some other things that I feel my kids need to work on. You guys, fine, go ahead. Like not everybody has that choice. Or to bring that conversation, that becomes a form of leadership, to bring that back to the group. The other thing is, can you satisfy all those different pieces that they need? For the state test and things like that. I've been to Texas a lot. I know the pressures they're under down there. But can they, like if it has to be about a character now, can they, is there room for choice that maybe on the surface, the group is not wanting to provide the kids, like write this assignment about any character in the book. So looking for sometimes just even the small ways to be able to allow change. Like I'll do the assignment, but I'm going to let my kids choose the character, or here's 5 themes that I want that we've kind of discussed, and they can pick whichever. So sometimes just any little effort you can make to bring in, choice, so you're just more likely to it's like that weird diagram with the broken lines, right? To me, that's the big, anything to get them in, right? It's like used car sales, like get them on the lot, and then you can sell them a car, right? Yes.
How do you set the stage for reading expectations?
So I think it's a great question, and really, it's all of a piece, right? Like what I think is for me has been transformative about this is I'm sitting down. So like in my new school, I guess we teach Great Gatsby. I've never taught it, right? And we teach Octavia Butler's Kindred, right? And then I noticed that Kindred has a graphic novel version out now, and so then I think, so I started thinking like, okay, why? Like, I don't know the context in which we teach kindred in a, in a U.S. an American lit class. I don't, I assume the Gatsby thing is some part of the American dream. So then so if I'm going to be expected or encouraged, whatever, to have my students read Gatsby as some kind of an inquiry into the American dream, then to me, I immediately start, part of my design process for the writing is I want, whatever they're going to write about, I want them to read a range of perspectives on the American dream. So whether I've got to bring in some other genres, some other nonfiction pieces, but the reading is all part of the, part of the origin of it, right? It's not, doesn't come after. Is that?
I guess I'm wondering, is the reading mostly done at home?
Oh, that. It depends. So in the year ahead, no, because I only have 50-minute periods, and I think I get to expect things from those kids where they go home. In my college, in the senior classes that I've taught for the last umpteen years, we're likely to start reading in class, so I can kind of a little bit maybe use some of those reading apprenticeship ideas, like them as apprentice to the way I want them to read, like that Francis Ford Coppola thing. Like they need guidance, even though they have the handout of what it looks like to read in that way. Sometimes, if it's a text that I decide I want them to be able to annotate, then part of the design process is like they have to have this on paper so they can mark it up, right? Or I've got to have a bunch of Post-its. That's a lot of sticky notes to have, but. And then this goes back to constraints. So if somebody is working with kids in whatever situation, right? Like your students, they only meet 2 days a week or something like that. So that's a constraint, right? So no, they can't do all the reading in class, but you have to design it in some way that accommodates that level of independence, because that's your situation. So it just depends partly on the kids you're working with, and if it's an AP class, I just get to expect you to go home and read Crime and Punishment if that's what we're doing, right? So yes.
Lori Stoll from the Kelsey and San Marcos Writer Project asks, when you talk about increasing complexity throughout the school year, what about the students who still need to work on some aspects of writing from earlier papers? Do you just move on, or do you reiterate?
So I think there's the one thing that immediately comes to mind is when in my view of the writing process, and this is spelled out in the book, when they get to the end of a paper, they're reflecting on their performance, they're reflecting on their process, and they're reflecting on what they need to keep working on, and so that they're doing that kind of that thinking about their own progress to try to keep that in play. And so if I'm really on my game, like I can't pretend that I always am, of course, but if I'm really on my game, then we get to the next paper, I'm sending them back to that writing to remind themselves of what they need to work on. And then my feedback with kids more and more, like I write on papers very rarely. Most of my feedback, I don't have my phone in my pocket, but most of my feedback is audio. And so what the kids do is I give comments in audio on their papers, and then I send it to them, and they have to listen to my comments. And at this point, I kind of have a rhythm about it. So I'll say like, oh, wow, Carol, I really like the way that you started that paper. That opening anecdote is really cool. When I got to the end, I realized I wasn't entirely clear about where you were going. So when you revise, go back in and look at that, and maybe think about this. And then I just kind of keep going, a little bit like a CSI, like with the thing over the body, slight contusions to the left abdomen of the essay, and so there's a lot of that, and then they have to use that feedback to go back into their essay and make those changes. So it's not a perfect answer to the question, but there is a lot of cycling back around, because I think if kids are just moving forward, then they're not getting a chance to kind of go back in. Because I work with the writers, pretty carefully, I feel like I get and am able to hang on to the things that they need to work on. So I get out into the class and work with the kids, one-on-one as much as I can. So where do we stand as far as timing and?
I think we are at the end of our live stream portion, so we want to thank the virtual audience that joined us.